And we're going to give folks a few minutes to trickle in, but while you are trickling in, I would love it if you would pop into the chat and tell me a little bit about what industry you are in. It's going to be extremely helpful for me to know what is the context that you all are working in. I do my work in so many different contexts: nonprofit, major corporate, startup, all of the things. So if folks can pop in the chat and let me know what industry are you in? Oh, good. So we've got some tech folks, defense and aerospace. Yes, I'm from the Antelope Valley, which is right next to Edwards Air Force Base. So I totally, have some very real experience in the defense and aerospace industry. Medical device industry, amazing. Welcome. Just asking folks to let us know what sectors are you in, so I have a sense of what our contexts are for this conversation. Technical consulting, don't chat on Pathable, although I have an amazing out and equal person who is monitoring that chat right here in Zoom, and that way I don't have to be toggling. I already have 2 screens and I can't do a third. It's just too much for my brain. Okay, biopharmaceutical manufacturing, great. HP, Taylor, hi, and Corvallis, I know you because I presented to HP this very year, amazing. Financial, more tech folks at Dell. Banking, great. Yes, I would just spent some time with Chase last year, back when you could spend time in person with people. Last summer, I got to do a whole thing with JP Morgan Chase. Biopharmaceutical, great. Investment banking. We've got some engineers, accounting, oil and gas. I've gotten to spend, I've had the privilege of doing a lot of transgender inclusion work in Texas. And so a lot of that has been with the oil and gas industries down there. So yeah, it's exciting. Great. So more pharma, business consulting. Thank you, Lisa. It's my newest shirt. My 10-year-old picked it out for me, and I have to say, she has very good taste. Great. Nuclear pharmaceuticals, finance, lots of finance folks. Instructional design, that really freaks me out, Blair, because I always feel like instructional design people are going to be judging me the whole time, my training skills. So be nice to me. Banking, tech, printing, more feedback on the shirt. Thank you. Working remotely, I feel like my least favorite thing about it is no one notices what I wear, and then no one is like, oh, love those shoes or whatever. I won't shoe my shoes because then I'd have to do some kind of yoga, and I'm not the guy from this morning. I'm not great at yoga. Financial services, for folks who are just coming in, I've just asked if you pop your industry into the Zoom chat, so that way I have a sense of where you all are coming from. What's your context? Financial services, insurance, biotech. Hi from Seattle. I'm in Portland, so beautiful day here. Hopefully this is my second of 4 presentations today. And so hopefully I'll get to see the sun at some point. Folks from Raytheon, great. Medical manufacturing. I don't know what CPG is. Will you put that in and spell out those acronyms for me? I would appreciate that. Wonderful. Banking, Chase from Delaware. Hello, Delaware. Pharma, I'm doing a really cool project right now with Fairing, and so I'm really excited about the work that they're doing in the fertility, family building, trans inclusion space. Biotech, oil and gas again, aerospace and defense, consumer technology, Apple retail, amazing. But we're gonna give folks, we've got about 300 people here. We're gonna just probably give another 2 minutes or so, let people trickle in. For those of you who struggle with attention and focus, don't worry, I'm going to turn off the music once we get started. It's just sort of like transition music to get us all here and feeling groovy. Great. And then for new folks, just continue to pop in the chat and let me know what industry you are joining us from. NYC moving to Houston with Disney. I love Houston. I have a lot of amazing friends there. They have a transgender archive in Houston. It's one of the biggest in the world, actually. So I've done a lot of work with corporations in Houston and Dallas and Austin on trans inclusion. And so I'm really excited that you're gonna move there. Say hi to Austin for me too. Retail, amazing. Kohl's, consulting, Apple retail, great. Defense, oil and gas. More feedback on the shirt. Thank you, everyone. Keep them coming. Compliments will get you everywhere. Professional services, Citibank, defense, legal, Disney Broadway. My heart goes out to you right now, Noel or Noel. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it incorrectly. Of course, my Broadway actor friends are really struggling right now. So thank you for the work that you're doing and doing everything you can to keep them involved and engaged and getting paid. during the Broadway shutdown. Yeah, healthcare, Zillow, amazing. Organizational psychology. Oh, I would love to nerd out with you sometime, Jen. That's amazing. Energy, Apple contact sector. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is great. So what I'm seeing is just a huge array of diversity in terms of industries that you're coming from: financial, tech, service, direct consumer, retail services, legal. Really exciting. A lot of folks that are doing diversity, equity, inclusion work professionally. So that's also really exciting as well. So happy to nerd out with you all today. Oh, someone is taking this from the lab in biotech. That's awesome, Kat. I'm taking this from my bedroom. I know. So good. Tobacco in Colorado, great. Samantha, the clicking you hear might actually be the music. And so I'm actually gonna fade that down right now as we get started. One of the ways that white culture shows up is in sort of treating us like we are machines or drones. And so one of the not so subtle ways I try to subvert white culture is to remember that we are whole human beings with bodies and with spirits. And actually my eldest son, who's 12, has just started getting super into music, songwriting, learning, teaching himself the piano, all those things. And he asked me last night, will music still exist when I am old? And it was so cool because I got to tell him, actually, music has existed since the beginning of human beings. It's really intrinsic to our spirits, to our souls, throughout all of cultures, throughout all of time. I was going to say throughout space, but I'm not sure about that. Some of the folks in the aerospace industry can correct me, but I don't think it's throughout space, but at least throughout all of time, there has been music and it has connected us. And so I really try to bring that into my sessions as just one more way that we can start to subvert what does it mean to be professional? What does it mean to show up in a space and encourage people to bring their full selves? So thank you all so much for being with me here today. I'm so sorry we had to cap it at 500. They were like, can we max it out at 3,000? And I was like, absolutely not, because it just gets really overwhelming to try and manage the chat and to actually have this session be as engaged, involved, interactive, and tailored to your specific needs and contexts as possible. I am used to doing this work in big rooms full of people, or even sometimes small rooms full of people. And so I really appreciate everyone hopping into the chat and engaging with me. And, I really do encourage you to do whatever. Oh, the mic is hitting my shirt. Thank you all for telling me. No, it's not someone's audio open. It is me clicking. And so that's all right. I'm not going to take my shirt off. Sorry, I'm just kidding. I'm just going to trade to my other headphones. This is why we have backup technology. Please hold. All right. AirPods. Boom. Okay. Much better. Okay, good. Well, then we're going to keep going. Thanks, everyone. So I was saying, I know that when we're like sitting down in the Zoom, and then we have a bunch of windows, and then we have all the notifications coming up, I would just encourage you, especially if you're someone like me, where you struggle with attention and focus, and working remotely is hard because it's just like a one-dimensional person on a screen, to just take a second and give the level of attention to this session that matches your energy and your passion for this topic. As passionate as you are about creating welcoming, affirming, anti-racist workplaces, I really encourage you to take that and then give it to all the people that are here, and pretend that we are all in a room, all 323 of us together. Turn off the notifications, put your phone away, appreciate my shirt, I'm just kidding, and really be with us today for the next however long, remembering that the systems thrive when we don't pay attention and we don't give energy and focus to this work. So thank you all so much for being with me here today. And I'm going to really encourage you to continue to pop things in the chat as we go on Zoom. And we're actually going to start with a little annotate exercise. So I have turned on the annotate feature. So you should be able to go up to the top of your Zoom or wherever you have your toolbar, click on annotate. From there, click on where it says stamp. And what I want you to do is to pick a heart and just tell me, where are you from, by putting it on this map. Where does your heart lie, or where has your heart been from? You may not be able to do this if it's from your iPad or from your iPhone. So sorry about that. But for those of you who are able to do it, just grab that heart and then put it on here. So for example, I am from British Columbia. And so that's something that I can do. It does look like other folks have like corporate restrictions, MacBook Pro, you don't see that option. Okay, what if you hit more and try that? Because I have it put on and there is no toolbar. All right, corporate restrictions, no problem. Well, I have an amazing person, Red, who can help me with those restrictions. If not, that's okay. What you can then do is just pop it in the chat and tell me. So we've got folks in Atlanta. How about this? I'm just going to put it on for you. Oh my goodness, this is going to be too much, isn't it? I see New York, Arizona, Texas, Idaho. Oh, now we're really checking my my geographic skills here. Oh, Montreal, I know where that is because I'm Canadian by birth and I had my honeymoon in Montreal. Okay, Tampa, that is somewhere in Florida. I'm not sure where. Stamford, Connecticut. Some other folks in, I know we have someone in, Taylor is here from Corvallis. I'm in Portland. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, good. Someone is saying that my facial expressions are great. Thank you. It's more helpful if you do have audio, but that's okay. All right, Sacramento, Germany, Scandinavian countries, amazing. Well, I've got two screens here. I can put some there. Seattle, Kentucky. Oh, this is so amazing. All right. Well, this particular exercise did not work the way that I wanted to, but I'm still thrilled to hear all about where everyone is from. And I would love to tell you a little bit about this particular session. Before I start, I do, I'm really, really pleased to live in the beautiful city of Portland, Oregon. And it's actually really complicated to do a land acknowledgement from Portland because Portland was really a transitional area for a lot of Indigenous people. It was, in fact, a place where a lot of people came to do trading, to have peace treaties and peace talks across Indigenous nations and First Peoples nations. And so I really want to recognize that this is the traditional lands of the Multnomah people. We're called Multnomah County after them. The Kaplemet, the Clackamas. The Clackamas nation has disbanded, but their ancestors still live here and all over the world. So they are very much alive, although their nation does no longer currently exist. And the Cowlick stands of the Chinook, the Chihuahuatin, the Kalapuya, the Malala. And then, of course, the many, many, many other tribes who made their homes here along the Columbia River. And now they're part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And I am delighted to share that any trainings that I do, I'll be doing one later today, any trainings that I do for which I derive any income, I give 10% back to the currently existing nations that stewarded this land. As with you all, I'm still grateful and learning more about land theft and the First Peoples of America and North America and globally. So I appreciate you going with me on the land acknowledgement journey. Still trying to figure out how do we not just acknowledge the people who stewarded this land for which we are all so grateful, but how do we repair some of the damage that is done in those communities? And so yeah, I'm gonna just continue to listen and learn and be present with you all and everyone else on that part of the journey. Okay, so our time today, our agenda, you might say. Well, I do this work, I think, in a pretty unique way. So we are going to start with just some space setting. Who am I? How do I approach this work? Who is the session for? What is the session going to cover? And then I use a head, heart, hands approach. And so that's how this whole session is going to be structured. It's going to be, we're going to start with the science, the knowledge around why it's so important to create inclusive workplaces and what do we know about the science of inclusion, of anti-racism, of radically inclusive professional spaces. Then we're really going to look at the self-work, the heart. And that's when people say like, oh, white people, you need to do your work. That's what they mean. And often people will say like, oh, you need to do more than a book club, right? The book club is the head, the self-work is the heart. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I'm going to give you some tools to do some of that work. And then again, knowing stuff and being in a good place personally doesn't always translate to action. And so that's going to be how we're going to end, is we're going to talk about specific tools and practices that you can incorporate into your work. So that's the sort of like overarching model of the work that I do. I don't usually do a lot of the head pieces because I feel like white people get stuck in the knowledge and the facts and the data, and do less of the internal work, and then are even too afraid to take action. But I'm going to stretch my own boundaries of comfort here, and I am going to bring you some of that work today. And then we're actually going to end with an Ask Me Anything, where I'm going to allow anyone and everyone in this session to send me a private chat message. You know, if you use that drop down there, you should be able to, and I hope that this setting is appropriate. If not, we can use the Q&A, and you can go ahead and pop questions in the Q&A. And if that's not possible, then I'm trusting Red to tell me. And I'm going to allow you all in this brave space to ask me the question that you've been holding on to about white privilege, white supremacy, anti-racism, anti-Blackness, like whatever it is that you've been holding on to that you've been afraid to explore and ask. I really believe that the unaddressed question becomes the deeply entrenched bias. And there aren't a lot of safe spaces for people to just say, I don't understand what this means. And so that's what we're going to end with, is an opportunity for you to anonymously grill me or ask the question, because I bet if you have it, then other people have it as well, about what it is that's been holding you back from being able to do this work with excellence. Okay, well, I can't see your faces, so I'm going to hope that this agenda is exactly what everyone was hoping. Oh, good. Red says private chat or Q&A are perfectly fine. I believe that Q&A can be, is inherently anonymous as well. And so that's helpful. So either way you want to do that is great for me. I'm happy to do that. And you can go ahead and start putting those questions in now. I may get to them, I may not. And it does look like someone in aerospace says that music is in space. So that is really great. And yes, the private chat is to all panelists. That's me. Amazing, great. And then all of this stuff is already coming in. Oh, good. And someone's already talking about neurodivergence, which I'm so excited to talk about today. White fragility. We're going to talk about white fragility today. Oh, I'm so excited. Usually in the beginning, I will ask, like, what questions are you coming in with? I don't want all of you to bombard me with that right now, because that's too much. But usually I want to know, because I like to know who I'm going to disappoint, like right off the bat. And so I'm just going to let some of you know, in 90 minutes, there's no way that I'm going to be able to make all of you happy. So let's just get that out of the way. But I am going to do my best, and also be very receptive and responsive to what comes up in the room. So to tell you a little bit about me, you already know I live here in Portland, Oregon. And then I have a really strange and complicated professional background. I spent my very first real job. I spent 7 years at the National LGBTQ Task Force, traveling the country and working with communities that were facing attack at the ballot box. And so sometimes that was I've been on the front lines of some of my generation's biggest fights for LGBTQ justice. I ran a big part of the campaign in 2008 for the No on Proposition 8 campaign. I ran the entire field campaign for the country's first ever vote on transgender people ever, which was in Michigan. I've been in Bowling Green, Ohio. I've been in Florida. I've been in Connecticut. I've been in New York. I spent 7 years doing this work. And towards the end of that, even just coming out of the 2008 campaign, watching us lose Proposition 8. And for those of you who, don't know or don't remember, that's okay. I'll tell you. Proposition 8 was probably the biggest vote on LGBT issues that at least has been in my lifetime. It was in 2008 in California. Basically what happened was some judges in California decided, we should probably let gay people get married. And they just started doing it. And then forces from the right decided, no, that's not actually a good idea. And they collected the signatures to put the right for LGBTQ people to get married up on the ballot for public vote. And it was an extremely hard fought campaign. We were in every part of California. I traveled all over. I was actually in California for 1.5 years prior to 2008 because we knew this fight was coming. And we lost. We lost pretty badly. We lost by millions of votes. And it was devastating. And coming out of that campaign, what I saw the right successfully do was to tell lies about racism, about homophobia. They very much told the story that Black people were the reason that gay people lost the right to vote. Wasn't true, not to vote, but to get married. Wasn't true at all. In fact, people of color were no more likely or unlikely to vote for or against Proposition 8, especially when you look at other things like political affiliation, age, socioeconomic status, religion. So many other things matter much more than race when it comes to homophobia and gay rights. But the right successfully drove this wedge into our community, and we saw it happening. And because racism had already existed and was relatively unaddressed in the LGBTQ community, they were very successful. And it was devastating. And I really had my own reckoning around what I had done or not done that could contribute to this kind of a lie being spread so successfully within my community, that then there are all of these headlines saying, you know, that Black people are the reason that gay people can't get married. It was devastating. And at that point, I really went to the task force, my employer, and I said, I want to fix this. I want to be a part of the solution. And so they agreed with me. They agreed that everyone should be a part of the solution. So they invested in our learning as staff. And so through my work with the task force, I went through anti-racism training with the Social Justice Training Institute. So I'm a professionally trained anti-racism curriculum designer, facilitator, space holder, teacher, trained through the Social Justice Training Institute. I've been through 2 in-depth leadership trainings with the Rockwood Leadership Academy. Much of it's focused on this intersectionality. How do we do this work in an effective way? I've gone through in-depth training with an organization called Facilitating Cultural Change. I have also done work with leadership development and interethnic relations. Maybe some of you have heard of the Intercultural Development Inventory. It's an evidence-based tool that allows people and teams to assess their intercultural competence and figure out then how can they move forward as a team. And so I'm also a qualified administrator for that particular tool. So that's just a little bit about me. I am white, I am transgender, I am gay, I'm married to my partner, we have 3 kids, and yeah. And I do this work in all kinds of settings. And so I've worked with major corporations, I've worked with startups, I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with community groups. Pretty much all of these concepts, bias, discrimination, anti-Blackness, racism, they show up in different ways, but there are many core elements that we're going to talk about today. So it doesn't really matter where I'm doing this work. It's the same work no matter what. And then a little bit about my particular approach to this work. To begin with, my goal, especially as a white ally, my goal is to end racism. That's it. My goal is not to feel better about myself. My goal is not to feel worse about myself. My goal is not to make other people feel bad or good. My goal is to really understand the science of change, is to really understand the physiology, the neuropsychology of bias, and then effectively dismantle it by giving people the tools that they need to actually do the work. Not to make them feel bad or good, but to really do the work. And you know, my work at the task force, I've talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of people who openly told me, yes, I'm homophobic. I don't think that gay people should get married. I don't think that transgender people should be protected from discrimination. I've had thousands of those conversations face to face. I know a lot about what it actually takes to change attitudes and beliefs and action. And so that's where my work is rooted. And then similarly, I just want everything I do to be really practical. Again, there are like a bunch of facts and figures, but then what do we do with it? Don't just yell at me about how racism exists in the workplace. Yeah, I already know, but like, now what do I do? And so I really want my work to be rooted in what is practical and what are some practicable applications for that. And then finally, I just think that this work should be joyful. I don't trust any DEI professional who stands up in front of a room, or I guess a Zoom call, and the first thing they say is, this work is going to be really hard. That's not science. I mean, it's not like it's going to be easy, but to create the psychological state of openness, if the first thing you do is tell people how hard it is, there are literally parts of our psyche that shut down immediately. And when we are able to bring joy and lightness and levity to the work, not just because it's true, like how blessed are we to get to do this work right now in this incredible time of upheaval and awakening, and a reinvigoration and commitment. What a joy to do this work. But also think about our ancestors. You know, I think about my grandmother, who was a nurse, who was the first woman in her city to drive a car, and how far we've come since then, and how she, in her own way, tried to make her little hospital where she worked, her little midwifery practice where she worked, more inclusive. What would she have given to have the tools that we have now? So it's not that this work is easy, it's just that it should be joyful. I think that it's a blessing to get to be better humans in the world and get to leave things behind a little bit better than we found them. So I try to bring that to the work as well. Okay. So this session, I have some guiding principles, some beliefs going in, things that I'm not going to spend a lot of time, I guess, arguing about. So my hope is that you're going to be on board with me for these. So I'm going to look at my other screen. Please hold. Yes. Okay, good. I'm on the right track here. So some beliefs going into this session that I'm just not really going to sort of try to convince you of. Number one, racism is real. That's it. That's the whole tweet. And I'm also going to assume that you all understand at this point that racism is often treated in our society as conscious, individual acts of harm. It's like the guy on the corner with the Confederate flag. Sure, totally, that's racism. And also, racism is unconscious. Racism is systemic. Racism is cultural. As the kids on Instagram say, people often think about racism as the shark in the ocean. Racism is not the shark, racism is the water. It's the pollution in the air we breathe. Whatever analogy works for you, it is everywhere. It benefits white people over people of color in many different ways. And it's not just one person intentionally being mean to another person. Next, we are going to talk a lot about anti-Blackness right now, the specific ways in which Black people, African-American people, people of African descent are impacted uniquely by racism, by racism, by bigotry, by white supremacy. So that's what I'm going to do. That's another one of the sort of just undergirding values of my work. I also believe, just going to make sure. Oh, no, we're going too fast. Okay. Racism was literally created by white people. I didn't really know this. I mean, I knew it like theoretically, but I just started reading a book to my daughter called Stamped from the Beginning, which is the young adult version of Stamped, which is an incredible book about race, racism, the creation of racism, et cetera. And I'm reading this book to my daughter who's 10. And it literally talks about like where does racism come from? It hasn't been with us forever. It was literally invented to subjugate, to justify slavery, which was anti-Blackness. So white people created racism. And then I also believe that thus, oh no, come back. That thus, come on, there we go. That thus white people bear the responsibility of undoing racism. We're going to talk about that push and pull. What does it mean to be a leader, a person privileged who is a leader? And then what does it mean to follow and trust the leadership of people of color? We're going to talk about like, when is it appropriate to step up? When do we step back? When do we, all of those things. There is an art and a science to that. We're going to get to it. But fundamentally, we created it. We benefit from it. We also bear the responsibility of undoing it. And then finally, fundamentally, I believe that another world is possible. I don't think that I could do this if I didn't believe that another world is possible. But I think it is possible to undo some of the harms that our predecessors and also us, we ourselves as individual human beings on this earth have done. I think we can make it right. I think we can learn. I think we can heal, and I think we can do better. So that's what undergirds this particular session. So the final thing I'll say about that is, who is this session for? So that way, again, you can just like duck out if you're like, this is not for me.
So we've already talked a little bit about what is your context, where do you work? And so this is really for all organizational levels. So whether you are a frontline staff person that is like selling Apple Watches in a retail store, or you're in a C-suite at Northrop Grumman, right? No matter where you are, this session will give you tools for how to be effective change agents in your workplace as people with privilege. So no matter where you are, this should help you. Also, I already mentioned I do this work in a pretty unique way. What that means is whether you like just read White Fragility with your team a month ago and were like, oh my God, or you're someone who's been doing this work for 20, 30 years, the way that I do the work, I think, is still going to be useful and hopefully give you new ways of thinking about things, approaching things, talking about things. And if they don't, and you're like, this is stupid and boring, then I just invite you to come with an educator's lens. So just feel free to just critique me in your head. Oh, I wish he'd done this. I wish he'd done that. You can also critique me in the chat. Super open to any feedback that you have as we go. And this session is specifically for white people. That's it. And bi or multiracial people with light skin privilege who want to explore that privilege. We're not going to talk a lot about colorism today, or the ways in which people with lighter skin or people of color get treated differently than those with darker skin. That's really a conversation that should happen intra-community, inside communities of color, of which I am not a part. But that's specifically who I'm speaking to today. And I'm not going to kick any people of color out. You get to decide for yourself, you know, whether to be here or not. But there are a lot of really important reasons to do work in segregated spaces. So a couple of those reasons are, because I'm a qualified administrator with IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory, I think about change. Uh-oh, someone says my slide is not advancing. Thank you so much for telling me. I fixed it. Ha ha ha. Thank you, MG56305. Okay. So I think about change as being developmental. This is also the science of change, right? We can't go from here to here like that. Can't do it. We need to go through different steps. And so for many developmental stages, it is appropriate and strategic to do segregated spaces, to have white folks talking to other white folks. It's more effective in many stages of development because you need to have a space where you can be brave, where you can say the horrible thing that you did that one time in college that you know was racist, but can't quite let go of and forgive yourself for. So we are gonna, you know, that's a good space developmentally for these kinds of segregated spaces. And it means that people are less likely to censor ourselves because we're not trying to take care of people of color by shielding them from our own racism or the racism that we experience. When we are in a brave space or we're able to talk to each other, we don't feel like, oh, I have to censor myself. I can't say that thing. What if I don't say it correctly? What if I get canceled, right? And so it creates a situation where people are a little bit braver to hold themselves accountable, to really hear each other, to really unearth some of those ugly things that they might still believe and might need to air out and address and then let go of. And I think finally, it removes the onus from Black and Indigenous people of color. And that's what the term BIPOC means. BIPOC is Black and Indigenous people of color, or in some cases, it means Black, Indigenous, and all people of color. Pulling out Black and Indigenous because of the ways in which Black folks and Indigenous folks are uniquely and disproportionately impacted by racism. So we could talk about that a little bit more, but I promised you I wasn't going to go too much into the ideological stuff. So you can watch a TED Talk, you can read a book about that. And then just a final reminder that like being with other white people, this is what it means to do your work. One of my heroes right now is Resma Menachem, and I can put his name up a little bit later if that's helpful. But you know what he says is that he doesn't really care what you call yourself. If you say like, you know, you're an ally or an accomplice or whatever, he doesn't really care about that. What he cares is if you have spent 5 to 7 years grinding on with other white people, creating a new culture that is not centered in white supremacy. And I'm like, that's great. That's what I'm doing. So that's what this work is for. That when people say do your work or get your cousins, that's what I'm doing right now. You're my cousin. And then some folks are saying, how does this type of segregated space not be perceived as exclusion? I think that that's a really fantastic question, though. And, what we think about, how I think about it anyway, is we have diversity, which is like, are there diverse people in the room? We have inclusion, which is, are their voices being heard? Are they being recognized, etc.? So like, how do we bridge those two things? And for me, intercultural competence is the bridge. It's how we get from the right voices to the right culture. And how we get to intercultural competence is sometimes providing people of color a brave space where they can support each other, where they can elevate concerns, where they can figure out resiliency strategies and self-advocacy strategies and allyship in and amongst themselves. And it sometimes means that white staff have a chance to all read White Fragility. You don't want Black and Indigenous people of color on your staff. They know all about White Fragility. I promise you, they do not need to read that book. And so it can feel a little bit like exclusion. Totally get that. And it's important that all the groups are being offered something that is meaningful and that the groups then do eventually come together. And different consultants do this differently. When I have led white specific groups for organizations, I have found it to be extremely effective. And usually the folks of color are very grateful to have somebody else answering all of those questions for them so that they don't have to. And that white folks on staff are able to work together to elevate some of their perceptions of what are the issues and to move forward themselves. So yeah. So this is one of my all-time favorite quotes because it's so important for you to do your own work. And also, we have to ground our work in the knowing that it's not enough to do just our self-work. We also have to change the systems. And this quote says, it's from Dr. Francis E. Kendall, every system is exquisitely designed to produce the results that it gets. I'll say it again. Every system is exquisitely designed to produce the result that it gets. Not intentionally designed, but exquisitely designed. So sometimes we're like, oh my God, why aren't there any people of color in leadership at our organization? Every system is exquisitely designed to produce the results that it gets. You have to change the system. In order to do this work effectively, you've got to do the self-work, but then it has to radiate out. Things don't happen by magic. They happen because things are designed to happen this way. So I'd love to hear from you all. Come on, slide. Let's do this. There we go. Pop in the chat and tell me, when you think about your system, what results are you currently getting that leads you to believe we need to make some changes? Something has to happen here. Obviously, if everything was perfect, you wouldn't be here. So you pop that in the chat. I'm going to turn the air conditioning because it's 1 billion degrees in Portland. I'm going to give you a moment to think through this and type it up and share it with me or with everyone. It's totally up to you, depending on how anonymous you want to be. I respect that. Be right back. I'm back. Okay. So what I'm seeing is mostly white men in upper leadership, lack of diversity at the highest ranks of Fortune 500, primarily white men in leadership positions, leaders who all seem to fit a similar mold. Oh, I really, really love that because we're going to talk a lot about culture and how it is that we can start to create a new kind of mold. I love that. That our society does not value Black lives as equal to white. So that's even looking at the systems level. Yeah. And again, the system is exquisitely designed to produce the results that it gets. It is not magic that we live in a world where simply saying Black Lives Matter is considered revolutionary. That's not magic, right? It was exquisitely designed this exact way. So I'm seeing folks say the workforce is a match the communities you serve. We have 2 elderly white guys as choices for president. Yes. The same 3 POC leaders have to be the face and the voice of their communities again and again. So we're going to talk about tokenizing. I really appreciate you bringing that as well. Recognizing more quickly when to take a stand. The executive board has only 1 Black member. Everyone looks the same, not transgender, white. Finally released internal numbers in an effort to be more transparent, but very few non-white employees and even fewer higher up in the leadership. Yeah, great. Only 2 African-American/Black women in my department, a failure by leadership to call out systemic racism. Yeah. On a team with only a few people of color, all the leaders are either women or women of color. That's wonderful. Neighborhood level, neighbors are posting things like on social media, like all lives matter. Yeah, being the only in the room. Okay. Women with children don't even ask for LGBTQ self-ID. Great. Now, what I'm seeing a lot, when I see 10 to 12 young people of color resign within 6 months of each other, the exodus, yes. Yeah, I have supported many corporations, many teams through that kind of a process, both the exodus of staff of color as well as the public call out. A company has missed the mark, and then people of color or trans people or LGBTQ people or all of those people come for them. Yeah, and so those are very, very, those are complicated and such an exciting learning opportunity. Great. And so what I'm seeing a lot, I'm seeing a lot of women and folks of color, losing them quickly, no people of color in upper management, similar type of mold, fantastic. One thing that I'm also noticing here is, a lot of comments that are focused on LGBTQ inclusion and sexism. And what we really learn is when we build our teams and our cultures with race as the door to the house of inclusion, we go even further with our inclusive practices. And what I just want to make sure that all of you are aware of is that often when, especially LGBTQ people, especially white LGBTQ folks, are asked to talk about race, what the white psyche does is it takes the off-ramp to accountability by saying, but I'm gay, but I'm a woman. And by focusing on, but what about sexism? But what about homophobia, transphobia, those sort of whataboutisms? And we want to, of course, be intersectional. Of course. There's the house of inclusion. Women are there. LGBTQ people are there. Trans people are there. And I just want to gently nudge everyone to make sure that you're not taking the off-ramp. If we're talking about race, let a conversation be about race. Let it be about race. And don't worry that like, oh my God, we're never going to come back for women. We totally will, I promise. And when we center the conversation on race, which is the hardest conversation to have, and believe me, I've had thousands of conversations about trans people, about LGBTQ issues, about gender. Race is infinitely more difficult. When we center the conversation on race, we're going to go much further. And the inclusive practices that truly provide radical welcome and exquisite employee experiences for people of color, guess what? Black people are women who are parents. So the gender stuff is going to come. Black people are also queer. So the queer stuff is going to come, right? And so that's my gentle reminder to just let yourself stay in a conversation about race, even if your brain wants to go somewhere else. And we're going to talk about why it wants to go somewhere else. That's neuroscience too. So yeah, great. So I really appreciate that you all are figuring out already what are the results of my system, because next we're going to try and think about then how do we change the system. And it is, to me, it's great. We're in an amazing moment around this conversation about race, racism. There's so much enthusiasm and energy towards it. And also it is very, very overwhelming, I think. When I just went on Forbes.com and fastcompany.com, if I just search inclusion or race or racism, like a billion different headlines come up. And also they all seem to be contradicting each other. So it's like, make sure that you address racism, but also don't burn out your Black employees. But also things are going to be even harder now that we're working remotely. But also you have to, it's like a whack-a-mole thing. As soon as you're like, okay, great, I got it. There we go. Nope, actually over there. No, actually over there. So there are so many contradictions that come up when doing this work. And so I want to really elevate how hard this is. to just affirm for you, this is hard. And it's not, oh no, come back. Okay, good. And it's not a competition. It's not that it is harder for white people than it is for people of color. Of course not. Of course not. Bearing the burden of racism, way harder than trying to fix it as a person with relative privilege, depending on your other identities. But it is also hard for white people to be doing this work right now. And I found this incredible meme on Instagram that I loved. And so I made it into a slide. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit. What are these contradictions? Really naming and owning, since it is really only in a white space that you should be talking about how hard this work is to do, how hard it is to juggle all these contradictions. So here's the first one. And I was hoping that we would be able to vote on annotate. And so instead, I'm just going to give these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this is number 1. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you to tell me. In fact, I wish I could do a poll right now. This would be the one case where I would want to do a poll, but I would like you to tell me which one of these 6 contradictions are especially challenging for you right now. So here's the first one. White people stepping into racial justice movements can be damaging, right? We can take over, we can tone police, which is where we tell people that they should do or say something in a different way, right? So that's one thing, but then that's countered by, we absolutely need white people to be moving forward racial justice, right? So these things are at odds with each other. And this is a bit about the push and the pull, right? We show up and then people are like, how dare you come here? We don't show up and they're like, oh my God, where were you? So that's number 1. That's the first contradiction that I present to you to consider. The second one, where have you been? Where were you? How can you not know? This is one of my beefs with Robin DiAngelo, who wrote Fragility. I heard an interview with her. She said it's so frustrating because white people come up to me and say, what should I do? And she's like, I just say back to them, how could you not know? And I'm like, Robin, how dare you? Right? How dare you? Because do you want to end racism or no? Part of how you do it is not coming at people with this, where have you been? Right? It's to come at them with, come on in, the water's fine, happy you're here. And if people of color want to express frustration about why it took us so long, great, they absolutely can. But we do not have the privilege, white people, of doing that to each other. We have to create environments where people are thrilled to join because we need them. And so that's the second contradiction. It's embarrassing to be like, oh yeah, until the George Floyd thing, I don't think I really did step up and take enough action. That can be embarrassing, but also we need more people, right? So this is number 2. Surge is standing up for racial justice. It's a white-led, white-centered national organization with chapters all over the country. And so it's one way that you can engage with other white people in education and action and fundraising for folks of color. Yeah. So that's the second one, right? It is embarrassing, and also we need more people. Okay, next. It's going to be hard to do this work. You're a white person, you show up, and you're like, hey, I'm here to help, right? And then people are going to be like, yeah, but why? Like, do you want to take a selfie with me and then post it on social media? Like, what's your angle here? You want to try to make yourself feel better? And so they're going to be hard on you. And so it is a really good idea to give yourself grace, right? What do you want from this? But also, this might be challenging. That's okay. You're going to mess up. That's okay, right? So those are at odds with each other. So that's number 3. Next, and this comes up with my corporate clients all the time, right? We hear over and over again, white people need to sit down, shut up, listen, right? They should listen to, defer to, take leadership from people of color. But also, people of color don't all agree with each other. What I often say is, look at J.K. Rowling and trans issues, right? She's a woman. If a man were to say, well, J.K. Rowling's a woman, I'm supposed to trust and believe women. She says I shouldn't like trans people. That's what feminism is. No. The one person of color that you're listening to on Instagram or that is at your organization could be the J.K. Rowling of the Black movement. You don't know. And so that's why it's so important that you have multiple people. That's where tokenizing gets tricky and why it's important to be really mindful that you're not tokenizing people, is because you need multiple perspectives. So you're not relying upon one person. And also you need to cultivate your own analysis and judgment. over time. You cannot keep putting the onus of decision making on people of color. So those are the next things that are in contradiction to each other. So that's number 4, if you're keeping track. Number 5, talked about this a little bit already, but like one specific role for white people is calling each other out. That's right, people who, that's, yeah, for number 4, if you only listen to ultra conservative Black leaders, for example, you're not going to get the full picture. Yeah. So this one, number 5, right? We need to be tough on each other. We need to hold each other accountable. If we're saying people of color shouldn't always have to do the work, then we have to do the work. We have to raise our hand in that meeting and say, I actually feel like it's inappropriate that we're not taking a harder stance on this. Or like, can you tell me again, why did we pass over the Black applicant for the white applicant, right? We need to do that. That's our job. That's one of our jobs. But also, we also have to extend compassion and care and patience to other white people to do this work effectively. So that's 5, right? In contradiction to each other, you know? And then the last one, number 6. This work, if it's done correctly, it involves white people giving up or giving away their power. It also, another part of this work is white people strategically using your power rather than hiding it, denying it, or pretending it doesn't exist. That's number 6. So tell me in the chat, which one of these feel most real or present for you? Where are you getting stuck? 1 through 6. So I got some 4, this like stepping in, leaning back, tokenizing. Oh, should I listen to you? I don't think you're right. That piece. Lots of 6s, okay, 4 all day long. Being tough on white people, but also like wanting to do the work effectively and call them in. That's so good. I have a tool for you for that one. So I'm glad, so excited about the 4s. Lots of 4s, okay, lots of 1s. Just figuring out, I hear this a lot, you know, and we're gonna talk about the developmental stages in a minute. And often where you are in terms of your intercultural development will map to where you're getting stuck here. These show up at different times in your developmental journey. Yeah. Great. And some of these, we're going to talk about specific tools for them. So that is good news, especially for now. I see a lot of folks saying number 4. How do you listen to, but develop your own? Yeah. Great. Thank you all so much for weighing in and for being honest. And if you want to follow the incredible thinker who created this idea, I mean, like literally my head exploded. I do anti-racism coaching one-on-one and with teams. And when I saw this, I like immediately added it to my newsletter to go out to all my coaching clients because I was like, this is brilliant. Yeah, and so if you want to follow them, she's actually a white trans woman. And her handle, you can see in the lower right-hand corner, it's @male fragility. If you want to follow her other fun memes and graphics that she creates to do this work. So I mentioned a little bit about the sort of like 3 primary buckets of work. And to just go a little bit deeper into that, because then we're going to start with the knowledge. This is where so many white people get stuck, is like, but if I could just know enough of the facts, if I could just know exactly what ratio of wealth is held by white families versus families of color, that's great. That's super useful. But if you actually want to persuade other people, most people don't live in the head place, they live in the heart place. So as you become a more effective leader in this work, you're going to have to be operating on all 3 of these platforms. Spoiler alert. So that's the knowledge piece. The next is the heart, or the empathy piece. I'm just going to check my screen and make sure. Okay. Oh, they're all showing. I didn't want that. Oh, they all showed all at once. Okay, never mind. That's fine. Next is the empathy and the self work. Really being able, I define allyship as the ability to see the world through multiple lenses. In order to do that, you have to exercise that empathy muscle. You have to have done your self-work, and you have to do your self-healing and your self-awareness as you then learn about other people. And then the third one is like, you actually have to know what to do. And one of my heroes, who's Laverne Cox, was interviewed on a podcast with another one of my heroes, Brene Brown. Laverne Cox is a Black transgender woman who's an actress and an activist and a speaker and all things good and holy. We do not deserve Laverne Cox. And then Brene Brown is a writer, speaker, scientist who has done a lot of work on the science of shame. So she has an amazing podcast called Finding Us, Becoming Us. something. She interviewed Laverne Cox. And, you know, one of the questions Brene Brown had for Laverne Cox, which she asked everyone on her podcast, is she says, okay, now imagine it. You have to do something that you know you need to do, and you're terrified, but you know you have to do it. What do you do? And like without skipping a beat, Laverne Cox says, I close my eyes, I take a breath, and I say, God, let me do this imperfectly and let me be of service. And for me, I'm like, there it is, Tristan, there it is. And so I always think before I'm taking, like, let me do this imperfectly, allow me to do this imperfectly. And we're going to talk about white culture in like 3 slides. But the idea that we can mess up, we can fail, we can try and be imperfect and be of service and then learn and then do better next time, it's just so critical in this work. So those are the 3 pieces that we're going to go into right now. So starting with the knowledge piece, we're going to look at 3 specific tools or ways of thinking about the work. We're going to start with white culture. What does it mean when people say like, oh, it's just a really white culture? What does that mean? How do you identify your culture? And then how are you willing, you know, how can you then take action to change it? Then I'm going to give you a little tool that I like to call PLEs, perfectly logical explanation, which is a way that white people get out of learning new information that might actually challenge our worldview. So we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to give you a tool. One of my goals is to not tell people what not to do, but instead tell people what to do. So instead of telling you like, don't be fragile, okay, cool. Have you ever tried to tell someone to calm down when they're freaking out? How does that work? I have a toddler. I can tell you right now, it works 0% of the time. Similarly, it's not enough to say like, oh, well, just like this is white fragility, don't do it. Okay, cool, but like how? So I created a tool called Cultivating Humility to help you learn how, there it is, Brene Brown unlocking us. About the slides, I don't know if I'm going to share them or not. I don't know. I'll ask the Out and Equal folks what you know, so what's their standard on that. Yeah. Okay. So then those are the 3 pieces of knowledge that I'm about to drop on you. Get ready. I'm just kidding. So we've heard this a million times, especially those of you in the startup world. Culture trumps everything. So how do you create a culture of belonging? How do you subvert white dominant culture? And when I work with teams, I often think about like, okay, I'm looking for very specific cultural things that we have like a whole, at my firm, we do a whole 360 diversity, equity, inclusion audit. And some of what we're testing for is some of the hallmarks of white culture that lead people of color to go, to not stick around, to not stay, or to have to conform in such ways that they are contorted into pretzels and end up being really unhappy. And then things build up over a long time, and then there's an explosion. I don't know if any of you watch The Office, but it's my favorite show. And one of my favorite characters is Stanley, who is an older Black gentleman who is notorious for just looking at the camera, rolling his eyes, right? He just like detaches. And then there's one episode where he's really pushed to the brink and he yells at Michael, the bumbling boss. Did I stutter? Is what Stanley says. And so that can also happen, is that things can build up and build up and build up if they're not addressed. Then there's an explosion. You're like, oh my God, where did this come from? Well, it was building up for all of this time. So, okay. So some things that you can look out for. And this comes from, nope, come back. There we go. This comes from an essay called White Dominant Culture by Tima Oku. And so really encourage that you check that out. One of the 4 hallmarks of white culture is a fear of open conflict. So there's a tool that I teach around resiliency for marginalized people in primarily white organizations. And I have an x-axis and I have a y-axis because I love a chart and a graph because I'm a nerd. And I often talk about things that feel good and things that feel bad. And then I talk about things that feel real to people, and then things that feel true to people. And within those quadrants is unhealthy peace and healthy conflict. And unhealthy peace is one of the markers of, or the signs that you have a white dominant culture, is this obsession with people getting along and agreeing with each other. And so why don't you all pop into the chat and tell me right now, how do you all, artificial harmony, that's another great way of saying it. Thank you so much, Lori. How do you all combat this, a fear of open conflict? If you feel like people don't want to like rock the boat or dissent, what tools or techniques do you use in your everyday life to help people feel like, no, they absolutely can, like, tell me this isn't working for them, or that they disagree or whatever? Courageous conversations. I see a couple people saying courageous conversations. That's great. Take a breath and just go for it. And so I'm just gonna, I'm gonna guess here, Jennifer, that you might mean like actually yourself being willing to bring conflict to a situation. Some people just check out. Okay. Humor, having a code word for when something is problematic, asking for feedback. I think that's really critical. I call it mining for dissent, which I actually got from the Netflix CEO. That's what he calls it, is when you literally are looking for the dissenting voice. You want the disagreeable person to be on your team because they're the one who's going to give you the heads up that something isn't working. I reward dissent. And so when someone says, I didn't like the way that was, or this is having this disproportionate impact, whatever, I really try to like give them some kind of recognition. I do, when I have staff members, I do a whole love languages inventory, like a workplace love languages inventory with them, where I try to figure out what kind of work recognition feels best for them using the model of the love languages, which is an old school tool for figuring out romantic partnerships and how you best give and receive love. Employees are the same. And so once I know what kind of recognition do they like, which feels best for them, that's how I reward them, when they poke a hole in something that I'm doing, or when they tell me that I've missed the mark with my language or with my actions or anything like that. People ask questions, really let people know if you avoid conflict, things never get done. Some people don't care and they just bring conflict. You can expect to be uncomfortable. Great. Create brave spaces. 6 stinking hats gives space for black hats. I don't know what that means. I am so sorry, but it sounds very fun and it rhymes, so that's great. Be vulnerable. Yeah, be patient, be understanding. Used to avoid, lately having uncomfortable conversations to make others comfortable. Great. And so I think there are lots of ways that you can start to create healthy conflict and create a culture where people are able to say, hey, I disagree, or like, hey, that didn't work for me. And they can bring it to you when they're like at a 2 and not when they're at a 10. Because when they're at a 10, you have to call HR because things are not going well. So that's what you want to do, is create multiple opportunities for people to give their feedback. I also do this as a supervisor, and I have advanced training and supervision through a lens of anti-racism. So then how do you as a white supervisor show up and let someone know, I am someone who believes in healthy conflict. And so I often proactively say, and I want to check in about our identities. As a white person, I'm supervising you, you're a person of color, there's that power dynamic. I'm your supervisor, there's that power dynamic. Really knowing that those exist. Still, I really want you to tell me, where did I miss the mark this week? How can I show up for you even better? 90% of the time, they're going to be like, no, everything's fine. And then I just self-critique. So I model for them, what could it look like for you to be honest with me about the ways in which I have missed the mark? And so I'll say, okay, well, I'm so glad that everything is working well on your end. For me, I noticed that I overstepped you. I interrupted you, and I sort of white-splained, right? I re-explained what you had already said at that last meeting. I noticed that I did that. It's not going to happen again, and I apologize. So then you self-critique. You model, this is how easy it's going to be for you to tell me that I used the wrong word, or that I passed you over for something, or that I, whatever it happens to be, some of the things that show up. So I cannot share with you the questionnaire I give my employees to gauge attitudes of BIPOC employees, because it's part of the whole audit process. that we do, and it's very complicated. But one of the things is, you know, do you agree on a scale of 1 to 5? I feel comfortable expressing a dissenting opinion at work. So that's one of the ways we would test for that kind of a thing. And so you're really mining for these hallmarks of white culture. So that's one, right? So the second one is, no, come back. What? I don't know why this is happening in this way. Please hold. Okay, come back. And then present. There we go. All right. All right, so that's the first one, is the fear of open conflict. Next is a sense of urgency. And boy, did I see this happen when the George Floyd thing, when George Floyd was murdered. Corporations were like, oh, we have to be the first ones. And let me tell you, a lot of them missed the mark in really major ways and paid for it like immediately on Twitter. So there is often this sense with white people of like, well, just tell me what to do. Let's just fix it. And culturally speaking, many communities of color just do not operate that way. Many cultures of color do not operate that way. It is much more likely that they're going to sit back, listen, discern, bring in multiple voices, and really take the time to figure out what is the next right action, as opposed to rushing into something. I think this is also shows up because what I hear and when I work with companies, what I often see is their staff of color end up having to work 5, 10, 15, 20 more hours than everyone else, because not only are they doing their own job, they're also doing diversity, equity, inclusion work on top of the job that they're actually being paid to do. And there's this false sense of urgency. So it is like, no, but we need you to look at the statement now. Well, no, but we need you to figure this out now. Right? There's that false sense of urgency, which is driven by insecurity, white fragility. So we'll talk about that in a second. But that's something that that shows up quite often. It's another thing that I'm looking for when I do an inventory with a company. Okay, no, come back. Okay, next is perfectionism. This is another off-ramp to accountability. And it's a little bit in contrast with the urgency thing, right? So this may be another contradiction, is then sometimes people avoid doing anything because they're like, oh, well, it's just, we just like want to make sure that we get it right. And then nothing ever happens. It's the big complaint of staff of color, is they kept saying like, oh, it wasn't the right time, or we couldn't really put out a statement, and then it fell. And so there is also this idea, again, being willing to do things imperfectly. And then finally, defensiveness, which is tied to perfectionism, right? We want to get it perfect, and then we don't. We're like, oh, but there's all these other reasons why I didn't do it that way. So thinking about these 4 hallmarks, pop in the chat and tell me which you think is the particular cultural aspect that you want to start thinking even more about in your workplace. What is the thing that you think your organization could really learn more about and could do some work to combat? And again, you can send it just to me or to everyone. So fear of open conflict is huge. Perfectionism. Sense of urgency. Defensiveness, personally. Yeah. When we do the self-work, which is the second section, we'll talk more about for you. So yeah, perfectionism, fear of open conflict. You know, because I'm seeing so many folks who have this piece around conflict, I'm going to put in here a really incredible consulting firm, a diversity, equity, inclusion consulting firm in Minneapolis called Team Dynamics. And they do incredible work specifically around teaching conflict styles, teaching mediation, teaching healthy conflict. I run a very small firm. They are a big firm, and they're a community of color and LGBTQ led. So they're an incredible firm that I highly recommend if you're like, okay, we need to invest in learning how to really have conflict in more healthy ways. Someone's asking, where does white male fragility? To be honest, I think all of them. I think men, none of us, many white people are not taught how to receive feedback, to be seen as humble and open. And so actually think that that can be part of the fear of open conflict, is like, no one can question me because everything that I do is right. Or that's what all of masculinity is basically built on. The sense of urgency, I don't have time to take in all this other input. I'm going to trust my gut and do what I want. There's the like, it has to be right. You know, teaching humility, like one of my favorite podcasts is called Freakonomics, and then they've done a whole bunch of episodes and study on how important it is, especially for white male leaders, to say, I don't know. I don't know. Super powerful. And so, yeah, I think all four. And then of course, defensiveness, of course, is literally needing to defend who you are and your leadership. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. And so number two, oh yeah, that's great. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is, what does anti-Blackness look like in the workplace? So we know that Black folks are twice as likely to get passed over just in hiring. So there's been a ton of studies. The most recent one out of University of Toronto, looking at hundreds of thousands of hiring data pieces. And what does it mean for someone to whiten their resume or not? And how many more interviews you get when you whiten your resume versus not? We know that Black employees, Black community members, are 3 times more likely to be unemployed when compared to white people with the same exact college degrees. And according to the May 2020 jobs report, less than half of Black Americans are currently employed. Less than half. So I'm actually not sharing this information with you to share this information with you at its face. But what I really want you to think about is, what happened in your body when you read those numbers? Because sometimes what happens is, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Sometimes what happens is disbelief. And so that's what I want to talk about right now. Because what can happen in the white mind is, we start to make up reasons why that cannot possibly be true. And here we go. So when I think about perfectly logical explanations, this can come up in yourself. It can come up with other people as well. When you say something like, fewer than half of all Black Americans currently have a job, there is inevitably going to be someone who's like, well, isn't that because of, yes, questions about the data. Isn't that because of economic status? Isn't that about education? Isn't that about, right? We have the whatabouts. I call them perfectly logical explanations, PLEs. And this happens in the workplace all the time. You're like, okay, but here's our system creating this outcome. Oh, but there must be reasons for that to exist, right? So it is like, when we're confronted with real evidence, the white brain is literally wired to reject it. In there it is. In social science, it's called the ostrich effect. So rather than accept that racism is real and that we might have even contributed to it, we bury our heads in the sand. And the way that we do that is by creating perfectly logical explanations, as opposed to actually believing what we're seeing and saying, what if this is true? And digging into the what ifs, right? What if this is true? And so that's the tool that I'm giving you, is to begin to track when you yourself start to use perfectly logical explanations. That's all you have to do in the beginning, is to just notice when you read a headline, when you hear from a friend, when you see something on Facebook, and your brain starts to go, but why were you out on the street at that time? There must be a perfectly logical explanation for what happened to you. It couldn't possibly be racism, right? And so just notice, oh, I'm doing it. That's a PLE. That is a critical first step to noticing, right? When you say we don't have Black leadership at this organization, well, what was the thing that, oh God, it wasn't Microsoft, a giant company this very week was like, well, we don't have Black leadership because there aren't qualified candidates. And of course, the internet blew up. So Wells Fargo, yes, thank you so much, Jesse. Yes, right? That's a perfectly logical explanation. Couldn't possibly be racism. No, right? It's an embodied experience of denial. And then whatever someone said, like if Beyonce could find 84 Black bassoon players for her last album, you can certainly find 2 Black MBAs or whatever to sit on your board, whatever it was. But yeah, and it's just, you know, that perfectly logical explanation piece. It's so funny. Someone is saying that their friend would say, you might be right, when they had that knee-jerk emotion of the perfectly logical explanations. Just sit back, and it was a bassoon. Okay, there we go. And I have a friend to Evangeline who would always say, you know, you might be right, whenever she would start to feel that defensiveness come up. So that's another tool to think about, how do you combat some of the things that start to show up. But now I want to dig even deeper into how do you combat your defensiveness. So the first thing is, notice if you're doing a PLE, right? Notice if you're trying to create a story that is not true, but makes you feel good. When someone brings you something and lets you know you have messed up, what do you do? How do you become the kind of person that people want to come to, right? And so I call it cultivating humility, right? And so the first step is to build your self-awareness. Figure out, when exactly do you get to that place of fragility and defense? The word, like when we say people are defensive, you have to look at the root of that word, defend. You do not try to defend yourself if you are strong in that place. There is a wound there. Maybe it's around being wrong. Maybe it's around being called out. Maybe it's around not belonging, not fitting in, right? We know that like a huge portion of our brain is ancestrally evolved just to keep us safe, including safe from fitting in and being part of the group, right? And so when someone brings something to us and we are worried that we're going to be ousted, our brain kicks into high gear and floods us with chemicals telling us it's the fight, flight, freeze, appease piece, right? We are literally being flooded with chemicals. Why is that happening for you? So just start to notice and track, when am I feeling defensive? Sometimes people can come to me about something and I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally talk about that. Yes, we're going to talk about how to combat other people's defensiveness in just a moment. Promise, we're going to get there. So really trying to figure out what is happening in your body and get that self-awareness. I get hot face. My body knows long before I consciously know that I'm getting into this white fragility defensive mode. And so now I know to track it, right? My face starts to get hot. Oh, it's happening. And then I breathe, right? I breathe. That tells your limbic system to calm down. There's no tiger coming, right? That's what our brains are designed. It's looking for the tiger. There's no tiger coming. This is just a person helping me be a better human, right? That's number one. You build your self-awareness. Why is this happening to me? What happens in my body, so that I can track it and notice it ahead of time. Number two, yes, okay, good. Build your understanding. Why might someone take issue with my actions? How can I avoid common pitfalls? So know ahead of time, what are some common ways that racism shows up in the workplace? What are common, PLE stands for perfectly logical explanation. Yeah. So know ahead of time, what do microaggressions, racist microaggressions look like in the workplace? It sometimes looks like interrupting people. Okay, building your understanding means you don't interrupt people in meetings, even if it's part of your family culture, even if you're Greek or Italian or Jewish or any of the other things that people say, the like perfectly logical explanations for why they are cutting out people of color. To know that that's super common, to know that that might be a sore spot for folks of color, then don't do that. So you can have that, so you build your understanding as you go. And then build that feedback muscle. Without putting too much labor onto other people, ask for feedback on how you're doing early and often. And then you receive it with wisdom. And this is what this means right here, receiving it with wisdom. It's how to get called out. So when someone comes to you and says, hey, you did this thing, you ignored me, as Nicole says right here, you ignored me in that group conversation. I really felt that I had something to bring. And I think it was about race, right? It's a great example. So first, we breathe. You have to tell your limbic system to calm down. Because I do a lot of facilitation, I used to do it in person. When something like this happened, when a microaggression steps in, appears. Oh, someone's asking what was step 3 to build your feedback muscle. There you go. Cool. So what I do, because often I'll be facilitating a workshop on anti-racism with white people, or co-facilitating with one of my colleagues of color in a multiracial space, we'll be facilitating something, or I do a lot of trans inclusion work. Someone will say something that I know to be transphobic. I get hot face, I drop my pen on the floor. And while I'm dropping my pen on the floor, I take a deep breath. And now I've been doing this work. I've been doing anti-racism work for 2002, a really long time, like 15 years or so professionally. And now, as soon as I hear something that I think is going to be hard for me to hear, as soon as that starts to happen, my first response is I breathe. That's it. I breathe. And that's how we start to give ourselves access to all those other parts of our brain, the smart parts of our brain, not the dumb part that's just trying to get us to survive. Next, your very first instinct should be to say sorry and thank you. I'm so sorry that happened. Thank you so much for bringing it to me. Now, I'm going to assume that everyone here, or most of the people here, have some aspect of your identity that has been marginalized, right? A lot of you are LGBTQ, a lot of you are women, a lot of you are both, some of you are trans, some of you are people of color, as I've already been seeing in the chat, right? And so you should never say, I know about racism because I'm gay. Of course not. But also, you know what it's like to be marginalized. Use that as your empathic weapon, your empathic tool, I should say, to remember how hard it is to go to someone and say, hey, you did this thing and it hurt me. You did this thing and it didn't work for me. You did this thing and it's racist. It's hard to go and say those things, right? So it's really important that your first instinct is, thank you so much for bringing this to me. I really, really appreciate it. And that you're gonna thank them unequivocally. And then, of course, you want to continue to do that self-work on your defensiveness that I had on the previous slide. When do I get defensive and why? How do I know it's happening? How can I prevent, stop myself from stepping on people's toes, etc. And then you want to work the feedback in, right? You want to take what they said is true. Not what's real for them. You don't have to take on everything, but what did they say that's true? And then work that in to the work that you're doing, and then continue to proactively invite opinion. Be checking in with your staff of color, be checking in with colleagues of color, be checking in with women, be checking in with queer people. Proactively give people an opportunity to say, hey, how'd that go? Was that okay? And ensure you're receiving multiple perspectives. That way no one gets tokenized. We do not want that. I'm gonna do a quick time check. Red, I would love it if you would just remind me of when we are done with this session, because I don't have that right up in front of me now. And I want to make sure that I respect everyone's time. Okay. Oh, wait, I want to bring up my chat again. Okay, we're going to keep going. 12:30, 12, oh my God, that is in 8 minutes. Woo! Okay. Oh my goodness. Wow. Wow. Why did you all let me talk so much? I'm just kidding. Okay. Well, then I think we're going to just try and, as much as we can, float through these next ones. Okay, so Chris, I'm not going to go over. I have a thing about ending on time. Okay. All right, well then I'll just keep going for now. The internal work is self-awareness, it's healing, and it's mindset shift. Boom, boom, boom. The self-awareness piece. So this comes from, I'm not going to go over, Jack. Stop trying to make me go over. It's disrespectful for the next people. Okay, this comes from the Intercultural Development Inventory. These are the stages that people go through using this model when it comes to their intercultural competence. So first is defense, which is the inability to actually see and recognize difference. Next is polarization. You see difference, but there's a judgment there, good versus bad, right versus wrong. Oh, I want to say so much more. I'm not going to. Then there's minimization. This is the like, I don't see color kind of place. Then there's acceptance, embracing difference and similarity. And then there's adaptation, which is actually being able to adapt your behaviors according to cultural differences. So this is a tool that I'm a qualified administrator in. You can take an assessment to actually see where you are. But I think it's really important to still look at these stages and be like, oh, where do I think I might be? Where do I think my team might be? And to know that it is very hard to reach people who are more than one stage behind you. This is a tool that works across race. It works globally across language as well, which is one of the reasons that like it's not a white-centered tool. But so build your self-awareness, figure out where am I, and then what do I need to keep moving forward. So like keep doing your work to grow and to learn. Okay. Healing from racial trauma. And a lot of this comes from the work of Resmaa Menakem. Some of it comes from the work of Ibram X. Kendi. But I think one of the elephants in the room around racial justice is the ways in which white people have harmed ourselves and have been harmed by racial trauma. Not just ancestrally, not just because white culture harms everyone, but also racism is in the air that we breathe. It is the water that we're swimming in. So like we have all done and said things that were rooted in racism. Oh, someone's asking to spell the names. Okay, Resmaa Menakem. I recommend starting with his interview with on Being, and then Ibram X. Kendi. Okay. So Ibram X. Kendi says that one of the vital stages of becoming anti-racist is in confession. I don't like the word confession. It creeps me out because of the religious connotation. So I just called it naming it. Being able to actually say, no, come back. Being able to say, here are the things that I have done. To bring awareness, to notice your currently held beliefs, to forgive yourself, to release them. All right, I'm going to pull up the link now and share it with you all. All right, okay, I hear you. I'm working on it. I'm going to have to change the settings as well. So that way you'll actually be able to open it. All right. Anyone with the link? Viewer, there we go. It's updated. Okay. So continuing to just like, oh, we didn't even get to do the AMA. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. All right. I have 4 more minutes left. I will quickly go through this, and I'm going to invite you all to stay in contact with me and my work so that we can continue to have this conversation in a variety of ways. So shift your mindset so you're not so obsessed with perfection. You're looking at progress instead. And I have all these skills. Oh my goodness, we're not going to get to them. I'm going to have to be okay with that. There's some things I was going to teach you about is how to map your team according to their will and their skill. So you can look at that quickly or snip it if you would like to do that. This I invented. So that's, you know, that's like trademark Tristan and my consulting firm. This building a culture of belonging is from my very good friend Rhodes Perry, who is a delight and a genius, who wrote this book called Belonging at Work. Here are the culture of belonging. This is how you can become a leader who's excellent at the belonging pieces. And then here's my very last slide, which is pay and recognize your ERG leaders for doing their work. Do not ask staff of color to do DEI work outside their job description. Do hire professionals. A random person from your staff cannot do this work with the kind of excellence that it requires. You know, a person of color in here said, you know, they're concerned that this is all about catering to white folks. And I 100% hear you. And that's what this session is and what it is intended to be. Someone says, go back a slide. There you go. Because I do think that there is, and I'm actually doing a session this afternoon for trans and for trans and BIPOC people on survival strategies and advocacy. And so what this is really about is cultivating those skill sets to be white leaders and to call in other white people effectively so that you can be better at doing the listening, the learning, the lifting up the leadership of staff of color. Yeah. Great. I know I do need to do like a 4-hour lesson. I'm so sorry, but you all are amazing for listening to me speak for 90 entire minutes. Oh my gosh, it flew by for me. And there's my email. I'm Tristan at Collaborate Consulting. I have a dreamy staff, just like incredible trans and queer folks of color that I work with every day. I'm so blessed to work with them. I am accountable to them. They will watch the recording of this and give me feedback as folks of color who are holding me accountable to being an excellent leader. And I will be paying for them to give me that feedback because that's vital expertise that's going to help me show up even better in the world. Yeah, and thank you all so much. One of my earliest memories of doing this work actually comes from when I was about 18 and I moved to Portland and was just starting to come out as transgender. And then I was kicked out of the trans community in Portland for not being woke enough. We didn't have that language, but I was literally canceled and we didn't have that language either, but that's what happened to me. And it created a profound sense of fear about losing my community because I really needed my community back then. And so pretty much everything I do from then on has been rooted in teaching people how to have high standards for each other, for their communities, how to expect the best, and how to invite people to be their best in a way that doesn't create more people who feel as if they are disposable. And so that's sort of how, that's where I come from, is so that we can stop disposing of people and we can start creating more equitable systems effectively and efficiently so that all of us can be part of building a more just world. So thank you all so much for being with me today. Please give feedback on the session, critical, positive, all of it matters. That's how I get better. That's how I'm accountable to you. And that's how Out and Equal knows, did this session work for you or not? And then hopefully they'll have me back next year or do more with me. So thank you all so much. We only went 1 minute over.